My name is Steph Ubach, and I am looking forward to spending the next hour with you, sharing a workshop on the topic of second wind for the second half. So what I'd like to cover in this material is really how can we help to energize parents for a reset who have adult children with intellectual disabilities. And during this time of COVID in the last few months, it's definitely been a challenge for everybody and has created some unique challenges for families affected by disability. So it just seemed like this would be a good opportunity to talk about that. So second win for the second half is what we're planning on. I just want to welcome you wherever you're from. So whether you are watching this and you're a regular viewer with Engaging Disability, whether you're one of my connections with Covenant Theological Seminary or folks who have read my books in like different boat, I'm just really glad to have you here. What I'd like to do is just walk through a little acrostic here that might help you to just remember some of the key points we did. So A, B, C, D, E, F, assessing where you are, building on the biblical framework, cultivating a pattern for cultivating parallel growth, deciding to recommit to the big picture, engaging with the process, and then finding a new pattern. So let's go ahead and enter into that and see where we end up. As I mentioned earlier, I am the author of the book Same Lake, Different Boat, Coming Alongside People Touched by Disability. Just released a new version this year in 2020. This is a picture of my family. That's my husband, Fred, on the left, my older son, Fred, down on the right, who's married to Cecilia, who's right in front of me, and they had their first child this year, Caroline. Caroline June will actually be a year old in a month, so we're pretty excited about that. So she's loads of fun. And our youngest son is Tim, who's right next to me in the picture, standing up in the back, and our youngest son, Tim, has Down syndrome. So that's our crew. As I said, I work with Covenant Theological Seminary in St. Louis as a research fellow in disability ministries. And my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. So you can find my personal website there, and also the ability to get in touch with Engaging Disability as well. So I think when you have a child with an intellectual disability and they go through this period of transition, right, which begins at age 14 and runs into the world of adulthood, there's this tendency to sometimes fall into a pattern where I've heard it described as always in rehearsal, but never on stage, right? That there's tons and tons of training for the future, but sometimes that future just keeps getting pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. So what I think we'd like to just do a little bit is say, how can we actually break that pattern a little bit? And so let's talk a little bit more about transition. I think by the time your child graduates from high school, and of course, depending on what state you're in, that could be a different time frame. But by the time your child graduates from their high school program, it is a celebratory time. It's a significant milestone. It's the culmination of a lot of work. It represents a new beginning. So everybody that's been on your team up to that point is probably super hyped, right, and enthusiastic for you. And I'm sure that you, at that point, if you haven't reached it or have recently reached it, have experienced or will experience the same thing. But for your family, in reality, graduation actually looks a little bit more like this, right? Which is this idea, here's this great finish line everybody's been driving towards, and yet right on the opposite side of that finish line is another start line. There's a level at which that's true for every individual who graduates from high school, moves on to something new. But for families affected by disability, often I believe that, especially with intellectual disabilities, that the other side of that finish line looks like a lot more of the same, right? A lot more of the same type of work, same type of goals. So in other words, a way of starting an entirely new way of doing a lot of the same things. So, and when it comes to the service system, once you get to the end of the education loop, right, and you get out of the high school program, what people often find is I've discussed this with many parents. We've talked about that it's like crossing the crest of a hill and finding a whole bunch of people milling around in a field, right? That there's not nearly as structured a path. It's not as clear a path as is in place in the education system. So when you graduate into the adult service system, the pieces are much less connected. They're very different from one location to another. It's just a whole lot less clear. So now that I've really discouraged you with that, what I don't want to do is to discourage you in any way. I just want to say that it is an interesting time, right? And so it requires maybe a little bit of a lot of encouragement in order for those of us who have adult kids to be able to take a deep breath and say, okay, Lord, we have another whole new phase of life to engage here. How do we do that? I remember one of Tim's team members saying at one point in his last year of high school, she looked at me and said, "You just have to let go." Right? And I remember I said, "To what?" Right? I mean, and there is a certain letting go that has to happen with parents, but there also has to be, for our kids with intellectual disabilities in particular, something to which we are helping them to grow, that is both allows them to grow and allows them to be safe and to protect them from limitations, consequences of limitations that they possess. So let's look at the underlying question here. So I think for all of us who are parents, the big question becomes, wow, how can I get a second wind for the second half? I remember when Tim graduated, kind of being overcome by the awareness of, oh, wow. Yeah, we just accomplished a great thing. And now we have a whole new era to manage. And I'm not sure I've got it in me, right? I'm not sure. It feels like starting all over again, although when your child's young, you have a lot more physical energy just because of your age. And now you're like, wow, I have a whole new set of tasks. And now I'm not sure I have the energy for this. So with that comes my essential caveat. I don't have the answers for this, right? Because there aren't specific answers, right, for any particular person. It is a journey for all of us, and we have to find our way, but we don't have to find our way alone. And that's part of the reason that doing a workshop like this. But my family is on this journey. We'll continue to be on this journey for the rest of our lives. And I just wanted to take this as an opportunity to explore some ideas that help us honestly assess, wow, this whole idea of transition once you cross out of the school system into the adult service system is actually pretty challenging. How can we encourage each other, right, on this path and come up with maybe some creative ideas that we can find strong roots for in scripture. So let's look at that. So before we dig into some of that, let's take a quick look at just really assessing where you are at the moment. This is not a very technical or psychological tool. You'll see that. What I want to just do is say, just sit down for a second here as we're talking and think through on a scale of 1 to 10. I gave you a little ruler down there. Right, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you right now, right, in terms of motivation for working with your adult child who has intellectual disabilities? Where's your motivation level right now? Are you just say, yeah, I'm doing all right, I'm like at a 7, or I am out of gas, I'm at a -1, it's not on the ruler, right? Where are you in terms of time awareness and management? I think one of the things that we realized with Tim is he's been out of school now for 7 years, and he's been out of high school for 9 years and out of the school system in general for 7 years. And I think one of the things we realized is as he lives with us year after year, as time goes by, it's easy to just lose track of how long we've actually been doing some of the things that we've been doing, and maybe lose track of actually being intentional about our use of time. Another one would be, where are you in terms of engagement? How engaged are you in your child's life, or are they pretty much just kind of hanging around watching TV, right, or whatever? I'm not against TV. There's a lot of TV watching that happens at our house, but is that part of an intentional rhythm of the day, or is it the day, right? Where's your personal energy level, 0 to 10? And then the other thing I want to talk about just briefly is what I call cultural 55 plus narrative myths. I think there really are these myths about what the 55 plus life looks like. That it's the idea that once your kids are out of high school, there's this incredible amount of freedom. You get to retire just around the corner and live on a beach with crystal blue waters for the rest of your life. You get to go out like these guys in the sailing picture and do anything you want whenever you want to. And that's why I think it's a cultural myth. Because in reality, 55 plus life is actually very complex, and not just in our experience, but in the experience of all of our friends who are at this stage of life, that the complexity level goes way up. That doesn't mean it's worse. It just means it's different, right? And so there are a lot of things. While some of your family members may have moved out of the nest, you might have grandchildren, which is a wonderful blessing, but does add an additional layer to the complexity level in life. You likely have 1, 2, 3, possibly 4, and if you're from a blended family, 6 or up to 8 aging parents, right? That you are dealing with, and so there is just there are a lot of moving parts, right? And so I think when we can just embrace it, that's the way it actually really is, no matter what you see on Netflix, right? And it makes it a little bit easier to not feel so much like somehow you're missing out on some kind of good life that everybody else has, but you don't, right? That's where the cultural myth lies. In terms of building a biblical framework, I just have found it really helpful to just go back to the basics in Genesis 1 and really just revisit, how are we wired and what are we wired for, right? So let's look at that just for a second. Let's go ahead and just read a few verses in Genesis 1. I'm going to read from 26 to 27. It says, "And then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them." And then it goes on into verse 28, says, "And he blessed them." God blessed them. And if you really look at that, just even that short section in Genesis 1, we really see these 5 key points. And the reason I want to lay these out is because next I'm going to give you a visual that I think I'm finding is really helpful for me to think through ways that I can work with Tim to help to be a catalyst to growth in his life. So the first one is remembering that we are loved image bearers of the living God. I mean, that is one of the most important things any of us can remember, that we really are loved image bearers of the living God. There's no greater privilege. We're created as his image bearers. What that means is we're created to display God's character in the world. And so that is something that all of us can do, no matter where our abilities may lie along a spectrum in any particular area. The third thing is that we're really designed too for relationship, for living in relationship first with God, in relationship with ourselves, right? In relationship with others, and in relationship with nature. And those things are apparent in the Genesis narrative. The fourth one is that we're commissioned, that we have purpose, right, to apply our God-given gifts and abilities in ways that are creative, meaningful, and beneficial. And the fifth one is that then we actually find deep purpose when we do participate in an interdependent, right, in a relational connection, right, an interdependent, flourishing society where our external human activity and engagement is internally directed by the godly character of an image bearer, right? So this idea of image bearing, displaying God's character into the world, living in relationship with God, self, others, and nature, having God-given purpose to use our gifts for ways that are creative and meaningful and beneficial, and then the deep purpose that we experience from living within an interdependent framework where flourishing happens through the external human activity that's an engagement that's actually driven by internal godly character. All right, so that's it in a nutshell. As far as a picture to think about, how do you build on that Genesis framework? How do you take those 5 elements of the really meaningful biblical truth there in that first chapter of Genesis, and say if that's the underlying reality of human life and the way we are framed in order to flourish and bring glory to God, what are some of the moving pieces of that, right? So I think if you look at it, you see, well, if we're made for relationship, having access to relationships is one of those key components. We need access to relationships in our lives. Another one, if we're to have dominion over, if we're to be fruitful and multiply, if we're to have if we're to be able to be at work in the world in a way that spreads God's character in the world, we have to have some elements of agency, right? That the ability to act, right, in a way that engages the world around us. The third one is the idea of meaningful work, right? We need to be able to do work. We're called to do work that uses the gifts that God's given us in order to uniquely engage the world where we're placed by Him, right? And then the fourth one is just simply the idea that in order to do any of those things, we also need to have some sense of freedom of movement, right? So access to relationships, agency in life, meaningful work, freedom of movement. And one of the things that made me think about this and go to Genesis for this was I was thinking, wow, why during COVID-19 has this been so incredibly hard? I mean, I do have friends that were highly motivated by the quarantine and cleaned their entire houses and painted rooms, right? I was not one of those people. I am still not one of those people. But one of the things that I think was really illuminating for me was to see, really what has happened during COVID-19, certainly where we are here in the eastern seaboard, northeast of the United States where I live, has been not a sense of access to relationships, but isolation, right? And not a sense of agency, but a lot of uncertainty and a lot of limitations in life. Not the ability to go out and engage in meaningful work, but being out of work or unable to work because your business might be closed, or you're trying to work right from home, which in some cases is almost impossible, depending on what your work is. And rather than having freedom to move in order to do any of those things, we've got a lot of restrictive movement. So, and then I think one of the things that struck me was, those very same things that have made living with COVID-19 in an era of COVID-19 so difficult are the very same things that the adults who we know and love who have intellectual disabilities struggle with on a regular basis, right? Access to relationships is not automatic, right? There's a lot of isolation that you have to fight against, right, in the lives of your kids with intellectual disabilities. Rather than having agency to act and to be fruitful, multiply, there's often a lot of uncertainty and limitations involved in living with disability. Some of it having to do with the disability itself, but much of it having to do with the social systems in which we live and the perspectives that people have about others who have disabilities. Same thing with work. Many people with intellectual disabilities are either out of work, unable to work, or are underemployed, right? They may have a job, but they have a less challenging job than they could do, or they have fewer hours than they're capable of working. And then there's the idea of restricted movement, and that can be both obvious things like transportation, but also uh, uh, just restrictions that come from movement socially, right? Or and in other ways. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. So just to go back to the positive again, to remember what we want to build on rather than fight against, right? What doesn't work. Let's build on what we're called to do. Let's build on biblical framework of promoting access to relationships for our kids, agency in life for our kids, meaningful work for our kids, and freedom of movement. Next thing I want to touch on, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to just note this, and that's the whole idea of cultivating parallel growth. And I think that both caregivers and adults with intellectual disabilities both need this, right? Not only does your child with intellectual disabilities need access to relationships, agency, meaningful work, and freedom of movement, so do you, right? And so in order for flourishing to really take place in your home, you have to be working on cultivating a parallel path to growth and not just a singular one. And I think this is the point where I would like to, yeah, this is a good point to do this. I had a pastor when Tim was very young and was in the hospital with really ill with his third hospitalization. He had bacterial spinal meningitis, and he talked to me about the idea of the family pie of life, right? That every family has a pie, if you think of it that way, and this pie gets sliced into different sizes based on the needs of different family members. And by definition, the family member who has a disability, especially a significant disability, will usually have a bigger piece of the slice of pie, right, than other family members. But his point was that, but it does take some intentionality to try to keep that in balance, right? Because you can end up with a situation where an adult member with an intellectual disability may have such a huge portion of the pie that it's really unhealthy for other family members, or that everybody's other needs start to become competing with each other rather than working with each other. So in terms of cultivating parallel growth, what I really just want to just remind you of, and this is probably something you, I'm sure, already know, but sometimes we need to be reminded of what we already know, which is that the goal is progress, not perfection for everyone. It's not like, well, we'll get one person all perfectly set up and then we'll move on to ourselves, right? It's always, all of life really involves progress and not perfection. The other thing I'd really encourage you to do is not get on the martyr's line of false choice. And that's this idea that in order for my child to have a life, I have to suffer, right? Or in order for me to have a life, my child has to suffer. And I think that really unhelpfully, is that a word? Unhelpfully? Unhelpfully, it's unhelpful. And it operates from a scarcity mindset. If you've read any of Brene Brown's work on shame, the idea that there's just not enough of any of us to go around, so someone has to win and someone has to lose. It's really sort of that element. And what I would say is that's not inherently true, right? You can grow and your child can grow. You can flourish and your child can flourish. Those things don't have to be they don't have to be in conflict with each other when we remember that the goal is progress, not perfection. And just recommended reading at some point is Andy Crouch's book, Strong and Weak. It's an excellent book. I really like Andy's book. And he talks about what he calls basically that he talks about flourishing in life taking place at the intersection of authority and vulnerability. And if it's easier to think about agency, maybe that's an easier way to think about it. The ability to act and the ability to take meaningful risk, that those two things together. Sometimes we think like we have this, again, a false choice, a perception that life is always better when there's no risk. And yet it's actually real flourishing, as Andy would argue with you, is it involves a tension between agency and risk. So I just say that so that you can just do a little further research in that area, think a little bit about that. I think that becomes more of an issue in some ways when we get into adulthood, living as adults together in a house, if you're in the same home with your child with disabilities. And I think these things are worth digging into. So I encourage you to do that a little bit on your own. Just try to not see your lives and your child's life as being either or. It's both and, right? You can do both and. I guess one of the things I want to encourage you on a practical level to do is to decide to recommit to the big picture of what is it we're actually trying to do? What is it we have to do this when our kids are younger too, but I think we sometimes forget we have to do this when our kids are older as well. Decide to recommit to the big picture, and then we'll talk about a couple of so what I want to do here is describe to you what I think that big picture encompasses, and then engage with a process to think through, and then try to help you develop a new pattern that maybe you can repeat, since that's the point of patterns. So let's look at this one. I really love Shepherd's College. Shepherd's College is a Christian college in Wisconsin that was developed just for adults with intellectual disabilities. And they've done some great work in a document that they have online on their website called Appropriate Independence. And if you remember, sometimes when we think about intellectual disability, it's easy for our minds to go to the most severe forms of disability. And I am not in any way minimizing that, or even saying that these things don't apply to that. But what I am saying is that the vast majority, statistically, of adults with intellectual disability, the vast majority of individuals would really be considered in the arena of mild or moderate intellectual disability as far as their intellectual capacities. So that gives you a lot of room for growth, right? There's a lot of room for growth there. So let's just look at a little bit about what Shepherd's talks about with appropriate independence. I think this idea of appropriate independence for adults with intellectual disabilities is really helpful. And these are my summaries of their ideas here. I like to call it the big idea. You have to read all 40-some pages of Shepherd's thing if you would like to distill it yourself. But they say what I think is really their big idea is that graduated responsibility with full accountability, consistent with the Word of God, is what you are aiming for when they talk about appropriate independence. Graduated responsibility with full accountability, consistent with the Word of God. And how do you actually do that? How does it work? You get there by supported self-sufficiency, aligned with individual strengths, guided by Christian values. So let's break that down a little bit. So, and none of this again is new from when our kids were younger. It just does continue. And so really remembering that with adults with intellectual disabilities, that the same type of structures or ways of thinking about growth that worked when our kids were younger often still apply, just in different ways in their adulthood. So for example, graduated responsibility. Your child might know how to do the laundry, but they might not know how to fold the laundry, right? So it goes from one step to the other. Full accountability is the idea that not only can you get a job, but you actually could get fired, right? And so, but you also could get a raise, right? So there's full accountability with the work that you're doing, and that all of the things that we do as we grow in responsibility, as we take on accountability, have to be consistent with God's Word in the way that we live, right? That's the big idea of where we're headed with our kids, adult kids with intellectual disabilities. What's that look like in practice? Well, it involves supported self-sufficiency, which is really just, again, this biblical idea of interdependence. But I mean, the scriptures over and over again talk to us about the interdependent nature of the body of Christ, and that interdependence is a very desirable way of living, right? And so in spite of how sometimes our American view of independence works, and how often that even drifts into intellectual disability programs and literature, in terms of the idea of, the thought is, the train has left the tracks. It'll come back to me. Anyway, sorry about that, guys. But in terms of just really that the idea that somehow autonomy is the goal, right? Just complete autonomy, or as much autonomy as possible, rather than a genuine, engaged interdependence between people. It also involves lining up with your child's strengths. Just like when your kids were younger, you usually did better at achieving IEP outcomes, even for areas you wanted to grow in, by building on their strengths. And building on their strengths now is the same thing again, just as it is for any adult. All of us do better building on our strengths. We generally don't do well building on our weaknesses. And again, doing it in a way that is consistent with Christian values, which means that our kids have to know what they are, right? Not just what Christian rules are, but what is the gospel? How does the gospel apply? What does the love of God and the transforming work of the Holy Spirit, because of the saving work of Christ, how does that work out in their lives in terms of practical choices that they make in living supported, self-sufficient lives built on their strengths for the glory of God? And a couple of key ideas that undergird all of Shepherd's work, which I think also align very much with what we just talked about in Genesis 1, is that your son or daughter is designed on purpose, right? God wasn't asleep at the switch, right? They were designed in it with intentionality, just as Jesus talked about with the man born blind in John chapter 9, that the work of God might be displayed in their life, right? This doesn't happen because, as Jesus said to his disciples in John 9, neither sin, not this man or his parents. This happened that the work of God might be displayed in his life. And in the same way, your son or daughter, you have to remember, and it's easy to forget sometimes as they are getting old, they're designed on purpose, and they're designed for a purpose. And it's the same purpose that all of us are designed for, right? Which is to be image bearers, to bear God's character into the world. And how, in particular, is your child going to continue to do that? And so helping them to embrace their purposeful and good design by God, and their purposeful mission, right, that God has given to them in this life. The second major idea is that your son or daughter is both an individual and created for community, right? And keeping those things in tension is important to remember. They do need to be able to embrace their individuality, right? And to dress in ways that reflect who they are, right? Maybe speak in ways that reflect who they are, enjoy music that reflects who they are, and at the same time to live in community, not just with your family, but with the body of Christ and with your neighbors, right? And the third one that's a shepherd's underpinning idea is that your son or daughter needs teaching for life that is meaningful for work, meaningful for his or her relationship with God, and I would add, and others as well, and both lifelong and applied. And I think, and again, this is something that's so similar to, it's true for all of us, but it requires more conscious effort with an adult with intellectual disabilities, is that all of us are meant to be lifelong learners, right? And so with our kids with disabilities in particular, not only is it lifelong, but it needs to be applied, right? It needs to be taught in a way that it sticks, right? And so, and taught in a way that's respectful for their adulthood. So again, that's one of the third underpinning principles of how Shepherds looks at the adults that they serve. And then the last one being that your son or daughter needs to be empowered, right? In order to, again, not just building on their strengths, but agency, right? Exercising those strengths in service, right? That they can serve for the glory of God in whatever work that they are doing. And so I think if we think about this idea of recommitting, right? Deciding to recommit to a purpose, getting the big picture back in focus, appropriate independence, and what that looks like. I think that's really helpful. And then that makes it easier for us to do the next thing, which is really engaging with a process. One of the ways I think the easiest way to quit before you start is really to just take on too much. Right? Take on something. Sometimes I think we tend to try to solve universal problems, right? And there's a place for that. There's a place for people that have to be out fighting the big advocacy battles of the world, right? And that's I'm by no means against that, right? But when you look at really helping your child to grow and become all that they can be, we need to not take on the whole social service system in the process of doing that, right? We just need to really look at them as individuals, at the individual pieces of their life, and say, how can I love my son or daughter well in this era of their life? So let's look at what that looks like. I think if you want to put into place a process to help you with doing that, help you with actually being intentional about helping your son or daughter continue to be a lifelong learner and continue to grow. Let's look at a couple of these different R's. I'm not sure if a lot of R's actually help anyone or if they all mush together, but here we go. At least they're written down for you. First one idea is recruit a small circle of support. Then we'll look at reminding yourselves about successes of your child, reviewing their strengths, realizing their potential, reaching for an area of growth, and then repeat. So recruiting a circle of support. I'm sure there are many resources out there on the internet for how to set up a circle of support for a person with an adult with intellectual disability. But what I think we can make them overly complicated. And what I'd really encourage you to do is really just simply find one or two friends to start who say, hey, would you be part of a circle with my son and daughter? And of course, this needs to be, those people need to be picked with your son or daughter's participation, right? To just be part of a discussion group with our family about how can we help our adult child with intellectual disabilities to engage our life in a way that we can foster more growth, more agency, right? More meaningful work, more access to relationships. So just keep it simple. Pick one or two people. When you get together as a group, one of the most helpful things I think is to simply sit down first and remind yourself of successes that your child has been experiencing, especially recently. It's much easier in some ways to keep track of those type of successes when you're in the school system and you're making certain goals and then you look at how you achieve them, right? And that doesn't happen once your child is an adult. Not nearly. There is such a thing in the ISP system, but where we live, it doesn't really function the same way. I don't know about where you live, but the other thing is that change happens slowly, and so sometimes we have a tendency to just not quite capture it, right? So we may realize, oh, my son or my daughter's really learned a couple of new skills in this area, and I hadn't really even realized that till I look back now. And so just really taking some moments to remind yourself of the successes they have. The other thing is to review their strengths. If we build on our strengths, we have to know what they are, right? And I think sometimes with all of us, whether it's our spouse or our other kids or our child with a disability, it's really important to reassess strengths and review those. Try to take a fresh look at your son or daughter and ask the people in your group, because they'll have a little bit different perspective than you, to help you to remember, to review. Are their strengths social? Do they have a great memory, right? Are they high energy? Do they have a unique perspective on the world? Is there a particular skill they enjoy, right? We look at the strengths and try to look really holistically at where their God-given gifts are. And then together, try to work your way through that chart that we talked about earlier. Told you it would come back. So, and focus on this. Go back to Genesis 1 and walk through these and try to just get a more tangible sense of what these things look like or could look like in your son or daughter's life. So for example, and I'll give you some examples after I explain these in a little more detail. So and try to emblazon this little picture in your mind. Let's look at access to relationships. So when you talk through with your group about access to relationships, what does your adult child need so that they can spend time with, and then I think these are 4 of the key areas, really, those whose company they enjoy, right? What does your child need so that they can spend time with those whose company they enjoy? What do they need so they can spend time with those who they'd like to learn from? Maybe your child wants to learn to read better. Maybe your child wants to learn how to make a video. Maybe your child wants to learn how to do a Bible study, right? There may be any number of things, which leads us to the third one. How can they spend time with people who will help them grow in their faith? Who does your child have access to that actually engages them in their spiritual growth and their discipleship, right? What does your adult child need to increase that kind of access? And also, what does your adult child need so they can spend time with those who they would like to help or serve? It's really important to remember that our kids not only have needs to be met, but they have gifts to share. They have agency in the world, right? They have work to do. And so what types of work in help or service to others do they need access to? What do they need access to in these different areas? If we move on to the second one, emblazon the picture, right? This idea of agency in life. And agency in life, it's this idea of what's your adult child need so that they can exercise God-given agency by having plans, goals, or dreams related to ways they'd like to learn to enjoy life, learn new things, grow in their faith, help or serve others, and the ability to act on those plans, dreams, and goals, right? So it's the ability to have plans, goals, and dreams, and the ability to act on plans, goals, and dreams. And again, they could be related to the same topic areas that we talked about, things you need access to. As far as meaningful work, I think one of the important things when we're talking about work is really to remember that the question is, what does your adult child need so that they can obtain regular work that's meaningful to them, right? And I think that's a really important distinction. It's meaningful to them. It doesn't, just because it is or isn't a job that has any kind of social status, or it should be meaningful to them. And it should be a type of work where they can make their own unique contribution to God's world, right? Without being that work being judged by how much they're getting paid or not paid, by the social status associated with it, and also the ability to learn new skills and try new things over time. Those are all part of meaningful work. Sometimes we can be so relieved that our kids get a job that we forget that they may not really be enjoying that job after 10 years, right? Maybe they need if we're all lifelong learners, maybe they haven't been given the opportunity to learn something new at work and try new skills and grow into a different position, for example. And the last one being freedom of movement. And I would try to, while I don't think I described this well on the slide. I think it involves more than just transportation. It certainly does involve, a very big piece of this can be transportation. And all parents of adults with intellectual disabilities know that can be a real challenge, especially if you don't live in a metropolitan area where there's a good bus system. But it's more than that as well. I'd encourage you to think more broadly than that. So what does your adult child need so that they can get from place to place, so that they might enjoy access to good relationships, right? What is freedom of movement ties into all the other things on the circle. Access to good relationships, act on their plans, goals, and dreams, and engage in the work that God has given them to do. So what I'd like to challenge you to do is to reach for 4 goals that your little team can agree on, right? And work for one in each category. So what's one thing? Remember, you don't have to take on the whole puzzle box, just one piece, right? What's one piece of the puzzle you could put in to improve access to relationships for your son or daughter? What's one piece that you could put into place to improve their ability to exercise agency in life? What's one piece you could do to help them to pursue or advance, right, in meaningful work for themselves? And what's one way that you could help to improve their freedom of movement in life? So let me give you a few examples. So just during the time of COVID-19, one of the ways that we have tried to improve access to relationships for Tim has been the same way the rest of the world has done it. But we hadn't done this before with Tim and his friends, and a lot of his buddies with Down syndrome are spread all over the county where we live, and so this has been really fun for these guys. So every Sunday night, almost every Sunday night, we have a Zoom call together with a crew of Tim's Down syndrome buds, and they have really enjoyed this time on the Zoom call together. And so it started out with me setting up the call and facilitating the call and having people come with some questions to answer. We kind of tried to set it up in a way that our friends who were less verbal than others still had ways that they could bring an object to share or whatever that was related to what we talked about. But the last few weeks, we've also I've moved it more back into the hands of the kids. So they're rotating turns on actually leading the discussion each week after I modeled for them for a couple weeks how to do it. And they're doing a great job. So that's been really fun. So there's access to relationships. That's one example. That's just one puzzle piece, right? Moved it 1 yard down the football field. That's the goal. Progress, not perfection, right? So agency in life, right? So one of the things, in terms of increasingly growing in independence, in terms of being able to care for himself, Tim has his own apartment in our house. Kitchen cleanliness has always been a big problem. That's just never been a strength there. And so, Tim is a dishwasher and all, and that helps. But he just really had not, a couple things. I think because of the kind of education he had, he really didn't have a whole lot of science, even though he was in a lot of regular ed. The farther up he got in school, the less science he had. And I don't think Tim had a really good grasp on the whole concept, honestly, of germs. And so when COVID hit, we were really explaining to him more intentionally about what germs are, how we kill germs, why germs are, certain kinds of germs are not our friends. Right? So anyway, and then also having Caroline around, right? Tim was very motivated to make sure everything was clean in his apartment for when she was there. So he has done a super job at learning by us just taking the time to actually model the same things I learned in home ec in 8th grade in terms of how to clean a kitchen, and just walking him through the steps of that more intentionally than I'd taken the time to do before. And that's really enhanced his agency and his pride in the work, the way he keeps his apartment, so that's been really pretty neat. So that's just a small agency thing in terms of a goal that needed to be achieved, and Tim's done it, and he is able to take care of something himself that he wasn't doing before. Check it out. Meaningful work. A lot of people during the pandemic are not back at their jobs or not in their jobs the same way. And so since Tim worked at a doctor's office and a grocery store, both of those things were not great places for him to be for a number of months. So he was home with us all the time for about 3 or 4 months. And so finding a way that he could make a meaningful contribution in his own unique way, right? One example was that our church had children's ministry hours that were done, devotionals wasn't even an hour, right? It was done online, and Tim and I did one together one week, and Tim loved doing that. He really has a real interest in video. He loves the kids at church. He's actually plays on the praise team, and so it was just, that was a very meaningful way for Tim to work in the world in order to use his gifts and bless others. And freedom of movement. We never stopped to teach Tim how to cut the lawn. right? And because Fred was home all the time, and Tim was home all the time, and it was springtime, it created an opportunity and Tim expressed an interest in learning how to drive the lawnmower. So Fred will cut the edge of the yard and leave the flat part in the middle, and he's trained Tim, you know, several week after week, and how to safely drive the lawnmower along the flat parts in the yard. And that just driving that lawnmower has been a huge sense of freedom of movement. And almost kind of like the rite of passage of driving is for many kids at 16, since Tim doesn't drive a car, being able to drive the lawnmower has been joy inducing, right? So if you can see, we just worked our way around the circle then, right? We worked our way around access to relationships, right, through the Zoom call, agency in life, through cleaning his kitchen, right, meaningful work, through leading devotionals online, freedom of movement, through learning how to drive the lawnmower, right? And that, just as it is for everybody else in life, for all of us in life, repeat, repeat, repeat. That's how we grow, right? We grow, we practice, and then we repeat. We can repeat some of the same kind of patterns. And I think if you look at Genesis as really being a framework for that pattern of we all need access to relationships. We all need to be able to act with agency in life. We need to have work that's meaningful to us, given the way that we're wired. And we need to be able to have the freedom of movement to actually do those things. And I think we can just continue to look at this cycle and say, how in the life of my son or daughter can I continue to say, where can we improve access? Where can we improve agency? Where can we improve meaningful work? Where can we improve freedom of movement? And just do it one step at a time. So in terms of finding a new pattern, probably a lot more likely to succeed at that if you snag a couple of your friends, right? And see if you can drag them into an experiment with you. So one thing I'd like to propose to you is the idea of experimenting with developing a review repeat cycle for monthly for 90 days. So in other words, team up with 2 or 3 families who are committed to helping their kids to grow in one of these ways, right? Which are really all of your friends, I'm sure, are interested in that. They just may not know how to move off a dead center right now. So you can suggest, hey, let's try this, right? Pick a couple of these goals, right? Pick a goal related to access to relationships, agency, meaningful work, or freedom of movement. Pick all 4 if you're really ambitious, so just pick one if you're not. And then share your success stories and your lessons learned with each other. Just touch base. Just touch base with each other one time during the month, and then learn from each other. Retool your approach as you learn, right? You get some great ideas from listening to your friends. That's how we've all gotten this far down the path in disability world, right? This is the other folks that we're on the journey with. And then record your progress so that you can celebrate it. Write it down. Keep a little notebook, and it'll be fun for you to look back over the course of time and see how many ways your child has grown and matured and expanded their horizons, right, through taking this kind of an approach. And most of all, don't forget to connect with us, right? Feel free to connect with Engage in Disability. They do a lot of great coaching of individuals, churches, families, you name it. Stay in touch with me. Feel free to connect with me at StephanieHubach.com. That's where I hang out, but it's where my website is. And would love for you to follow my work as well. So that address is right there for you. You can email me at steph.hubach@covenantseminary.edu, or you can also get a hold of me through my website. So thanks for coming. Hope you enjoyed it. Love to hear from you sometime. God bless.